Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, July 12th, 2023, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last week. And what we'll do each week is take our questions that we ask here on the Roundup from our newsletter that starts on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern, and that newsletter comes out at that time if you're subscribing through our website, and I'll be dropping the link into the chat here for the places where you can get that to register if you prefer email inbox delivery of the newsletter. That will come Monday mornings, again, 9 a.m. Eastern. The alternative is to if you'd like to see this week's edition of the newsletter, I'll drop the link for that as well in the chat, as well as our second way of receiving the newsletter, and that is via our LinkedIn service. So if you prefer to get your international ed news via LinkedIn, you can do so by going to the link for our LinkedIn subscription page for the newsletter, this week's edition as well. So you can subscribe via that method so that you can see all the news that potentially we cover in question format here on Wednesday afternoons. And the reason for that is we see themes each week that develop from those news stories. We give you our hot takes on those news stories in the newsletter that comes out on Mondays, either via LinkedIn or the website. The other option is from those news stories, we see these themes develop that kind of coalesce around some questions that we think are quite important for our leaders that follow us, SMIE Consulting, in the industry, across international education, not only in the U.S. but around the world. We're grateful for your participation in our chats, on the live chats on Wednesdays. But we also appreciate you subscribing to our newsletter, which now reaches over 1,200 individuals around the world. So thank you very much for making the newsletter part of your international edification each week. So as we do each week, we take the news stories that we see develop in the newsletter, and we look at some themes that we see developing. And today we're going to answer the following 3 questions. Why should we celebrate immigrants and refugees? Where are Chinese students going? And where are your top priorities for recruitment in terms of destination markets in the coming year? So we'll answer those 3 questions and more today. So let's get right into it. First question, why should we celebrate immigrants and refugees in the United States? And yes, if you hadn't guessed, it is a rhetorical question. Of course we should. Our nation is a country of immigrants. We were founded by those who left their home countries to colonize the United States and eventually, or colonize the Americas here. That's part of British North America. That at the time in the 18th century, 17th and 18th century, was seen as a refuge away from a new opportunity away from the mother country, but in a new colony. But soon developed those initial feelings of no taxation without representation, and that's led to the American Revolution in 1776 and eventually becoming our own nation after the Treaty of Paris in 1783 and inaugurating our first president, George Washington, in 1789. So there was a long road, and since then, since our country's founding, immigrant communities have been welcomed in varying degrees of friendliness, depending on where they were from, of course, that impacted that originally. But whether from Europe, whether from enslaved peoples that came to the U.S. initially and received freedom afterwards, to Native American populations that were here long before us, that are part of who we are as a nation now. As the country expanded, it's from sea to shining sea. It has been developed in waves by immigrants that built the railroads, the Irish immigrants and Northern European immigrants that built the railroads from the East Coast, the Chinese immigrants that came and settled and helped build the railroads in from the West Coast, and everywhere in between. We've seen these flows of immigrants, immigrant communities in various waves since the earliest days of the country. And myself, I'm an immigrant. I came to the U.S. at age 5, so I had a British accent at the time, but my father's company at the time transferred him to their U.S. headquarters, and I was an L2 intercompany transfer dependent when I came to the United States as an international student in kindergarten. So immigrants and refugees, we've had stories of refugees that have come to the U.S. over the decades, over the centuries, is extensive. We have been seen, and maybe not as much as we used to be, but we had been seen as a shining light, that city on a hill that attracted individuals from all over the world that were trying to escape persecution in their own countries to come to a place where they would be welcomed. Maybe at least not initially, depending on where they were coming from, but in the end became important pieces and foundational pieces of our society, of our communities. No matter where you were from in the world, you could come and you could make it in the U.S. And that was how the Statue of Liberty came to us from the French. Give us your huddled masses, your poor, your huddled masses that came to the U.S. as an escape from the persecution or the economic deprivation they were facing in their home countries. And the past of refugees and immigrants over the years has been spotted one in terms of the way they've been treated in certain periods, and it's never been this completely rosy story for everyone at all. And certain groups have received certain persecution along the way, even legislatively. There were waves of not only immigrants coming to the U.S., but also reactions against that in times when they were seen as, in politicians' eyes, as less than, and they were legislated against groups coming from certain countries. But why do we celebrate them, or should we celebrate them? Because they have gone through so much to get here. And we often, and as American citizens, even though I am one now, I don't take for granted my path to become and the privilege I've experienced to be able to get where I am and the opportunities I have today because of the journey that my parents went through and my rights as a U.S. citizen. I don't take that for granted at all. But certainly as an immigrant, I think that we even see greater value in what the United States can and should represent in the world as a place of a land of opportunity. Where they can come and achieve their own version of the American dream. And that's something that's always been held out and seen as a positive, why people continue to come in record numbers to the United States, flooding our southern borders, people coming for economic migration to trying to escape persecution from gangs or whatever it might have been in their home countries. So we continue to see these massive flows of immigrants that have come into the United States, some legally, some illegally, but have come here for that reason to become, have their piece of the American dream. For some, it has taken a long, long time to achieve that dream. Some, it's still pending, even though they've been in the country for decades. That's part of the challenge of our immigration system. It's clearly broken. Everyone knows it is. But the political will has never coalesced around this topic to do something about it in a substantial and transformative way that can make the United States, once again, that shining beacon. The stories that I'm going to share this week are from that kind of back up what we're talking about here. Is first a Brookings article called "Why Immigrants Are America's Superpower." And it goes into covering a lot of the details of interviews David Dollar, or the interviewer is David Dollar, host of the Brookings Trade podcast, Dollar and Cents. And he's interviewing in this podcast, basically, Wendy Edelberg, Senior Fellow at the Brookings and Director of the Hamilton Project, talking about the immigrant experience, early immigrants through to today. And it's a really insightful interview. And I think it reflects a lot of what us in international education talk about all the time in terms of the kinds of people who we see wanting to come to the United States to study. They have these same dreams and potential for what they want to do and see as the ability to make the most for their families through their education that they receive here in the U.S. and those that decide that they want to stay and do so legally. Now you see these opportunities really that immigrants and those that come as students that want to become immigrants really have just an incredible benefit to the U.S. in terms of what their contributions have been to the founding of our country, to building our buildings, to populating our states, to paying their taxes, to becoming contributing members to society. All of these things are seen as vastly popular, prominent examples of why immigrants can and should be treated as well as as I would hope, as fellow immigrants would hope. So the second piece, our article that's connected to this, is from the National Foundation for American Policy. For those that have followed Stuart Anderson, this is his organization. He regularly contributes to Forbes and talks about immigration issues, work visa relations, that type of thing. And he has a new policy brief out on AI and immigrants, and has some really fascinating facts in here that 70% of full-time graduate students in fields related to artificial intelligence are international students. 77% of the leading U.S.-based AI companies were founded or co-founded by immigrants or the children of immigrants. So there's some really great data in this, and some anecdotal stories of those foreign-born individuals that have come to the United States and are playing now a critical role in development of key skills and technologies in AI. So that's another great reason to celebrate them. A third article dealing specifically with refugees is actually a fairly significant landmark in U.S. migration, immigration, refugee policy, frankly, in terms of access to education. The government has now created this path to U.S. colleges for refugees that allows, it's backed by the U.S. State Department, will enable qualified students to resettle in the United States, enroll at a participating institution, and obtain legal permanent residency with the opportunity to apply for U.S. citizenship. The program is called Welcome Corps on Campus, and that allows American